Leaders are not born, they're built. While building leaders is a challenge, at Engineering Leadership, we've created a framework that actively guides anyone to discovering their potential. We establish 17 constant values that cannot be compromised no matter the situation. They offer insight to the core of leadership and provide a starting point that simplifies the world's most complicated topics. With these constants, you will be able to empower yourself and your team to tackle situations deemed impossible.
Well, hello, I'm Doug Hawk, your host for Engineering Leadership. I appreciate everybody joining us for another episode today. As you know, we bring together successful engineering leaders from across all kinds of industry and technologies. We certainly have a proven executive with us today that has an amazing background across companies like Life360, Patreon, Salesforce, Yahoo, and today serves as an advisor to some of those companies and also an investor and an angel investor, and also just an incredible technical leader who today has chosen to talk to us about one of our key constants, which is humility. As you know, we break down what we believe is an incredibly complex topic around leadership into, sort of solvable bits. And we use these foundational constants to do that. Our mindset is that leaders are built, not born, and that we can all work to improve our leadership skills and our capabilities. And that's our goal here, is to help all of us do that and get better at the craft and to learn from those who have a long track record of doing it successfully. So thank you for joining us, Virendra, and excited to have you today. And maybe just kick us off by saying, why humility? What makes that one of the most important constants to you in your leadership approach?
Excited to be here, Doug. Humility is one of those characteristics as a leader, I'd say, that has been extremely important to me, not because necessarily I have exhibited it all the time, but it's one that I found to be one that sets great leaders from good leaders. I've seen so many leaders that make it about themselves. Here in Silicon Valley that I've spent my entire professional career, there's a lot of ego and pride. And I can tell you the leaders that have impressed me the most are the ones with the smallest ego and did not make it about themselves. Leaders that care more about how the folks on their team how they are doing rather than what they can do for them tend to be the ones that people remember and have a lasting legacy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think it's I'd always said there's a fine line between having pride in your work and being prideful in your work, right? And I think that's it's really good. And I talk a lot about humility in that sense of not diminishing what you are or who you are or what you can do or what you've done, but always recognizing that, everyone you work with in one form or another and contribute in different ways, has every bit as much potential as you do. And, the real job of a leader is to find that potential in them, help them develop it, help them advance it. And, the amount of engagement and effort, you can get in that type of relationship is far, far more than you could ever command by, simply being in charge.
Totally. Again, the words, as you were talking about, this whole aspect of being an autocratic leader, and I've had my fair share earlier parts of my career of being an autocratic leader. And just from a software development perspective, I don't know which one came first. I don't know if it's me having teenagers or agile, but I think a lot of the agile concepts from a software perspective tend to embody this whole aspect of humility and collaboration that I think is extremely useful and probably important when it comes to leadership.
How do you see, I was reading some of your writings on Medium, and I thought you touched on an excellent connection that for me helps sort of illuminate humility, and that was vulnerability, right? And the fact that being vulnerable can be such a gift and such a advantage when working with your teams and dealing with challenges and having that sense of self-awareness, which you also talked about, I think is an excellent component of that. But do you feel like, some degree of vulnerability is absolutely essential to really embracing humility and using it productively?
Yeah. It was very interesting, this whole aspect of vulnerability. I think they're very closely related and important, I would say. In many ways, I think, Doug, I think it goes against the grain of society, because we think, again, even from a gender perspective, I think there's this thing where people talk about men being, strong and, but I think vulnerability is a sign of strength. In fact, Brene Brown is one of my, authors that I listen to quite a lot. And she defines vulnerability. She has some great talks on vulnerability. She says, vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control over the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. And I think that just it's just has helped me as a leader. Towards the latter part of my career, I started doing that. In fact, there's a book by the name of called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And she talks about how the best leaders make everyone smarter. And there was one quality I think I remember, I don't know, because I took my team through this, and it said when they interviewed a lot of these multipliers, they talked about this one quality of vulnerability that leaders exhibited that helped them be multipliers versus diminishers. And it was this quality of vulnerability to be able to stand up and say as a leader, hey, here's where I messed up. Here's where I didn't do it right. It allows people to see a leader that is human, where mistakes are okay. And so I think that's a sign of humility. That's a sign of vulnerability that says, hey, here's a person that I can relate to. And then it dispels this whole aspect of, I think, in corporate America, that can be fear-based. That's the antithesis of humility in some ways.
Right. I think you're actually right. I love that book. We'll reference it in the show notes. But yeah, the Multipliers by Wiseman is really good. I thought she hit on several of these topics in ways that, and I think are examples of just how important and impactful leadership of this kind can be to a company or to a team or to a community, for that matter, in terms of really connecting with people in ways that takes everyone to a higher level, right?
Yeah, totally.
And it is a multiplicative effect, right? It's not 1 + 1 = 2. It's 2 times infinity equals as much as you can possibly put together, right? And it's I think that's an essential element of great leadership, and something that we don't learn a lot about this in our formal training as engineers, right? And I think it's also part of what we've talked about a little bit on this series is the fact that as engineers we're trained to get the answer, and and to be right, and the fact that a lot of times leadership is, and particularly humility in some of these areas of leadership we're talking about today, essentially requires you to be comfortable and vulnerable being wrong, and owning that, and being humble about that assertion, but also comfortable with being wrong, which can be tough as an engineer when you're trained from the beginning to get the answer and get it right.
Yeah, no, I think it's extremely important. And I think as I look back and going, hey, what would I tell a younger Virendra in some ways when it comes to what you're talking about, getting it right? And as engineers, I would say there's a lot, Doug, that we've been trained with the left side of our brain. Again, at the risk of being stereotypical, I would say if you took engineer and male, into the equation, now you have an extremely left-brained activity. And I have found that the people that are, for lack of a better word, most successful in my teams are the ones that can integrate both the left and right side of our brain, which, the whole aspect of emotional intelligence, vulnerability, courage, humility, are aspects that are integrating the right side of our brain. But it's not something that we've necessarily been trained about. So it's like a skill that you have to really develop.
Yep. Was there a moment for you, Virendra, where, I guess I would ask this and I'm sensitive to it, but, did you come to this understanding proactively, or did you hit the wall on something and realize, like, I've got to approach this with a different perspective than I have in the past? Like, what was your most important kind of learning moment around humility and how you integrated it into your leadership style?
Good question. I think I start out, thinking I'm conquering the world and I'm kind of the best thing out there. And I think it's through probably failures that you learn. I think I've had my best learning, where if a startup doesn't work out, or you think you made this most amazing decision and it turns out not to be true, or I'd say the biggest aha may have been through 360 feedbacks, where I think I'm this most amazing leader and I get this 360 feedback that says, well, you're kind of, the way you show up, it isn't quite, I would say multiplier. In fact, at the risk of being vulnerable, let me give you how I would show up. Okay. And it says here, and again, it says the first type, which diminishes, drain intelligence, energy, and the capability from ones around the room. They are idea killers, energy sappers, and diminishers of talent and commitment. So in the beginning, Doug, it would be all about me. How do I become, climb the corporate ladder? How do I build my empire, right? Rather than building people. So I would say, Doug, if I had to look at, there were a couple of 360s I got in a row that I go, wow, I really need to kind of look at this, right? And it's not about myself. And I would say that made the light bulbs go off. And then in some ways, I think putting this goal of going, hey, this is how I want to be experienced as a person. There's a part that Daniel Goleman talks about emotional intelligence. And it's like, it's not about who I think I am. It's how the people around me experience me. And then I started putting this going, here's the kind of person I want to be like. Hey, when I walk into the room, light bulbs go off people's heads. Ideas flow. Problems get solved. I want to be able to inspire people to stretch themselves to deliver the results, surpass expectations, right? And so I would say, 360s really kind of go, aha. I was probably maybe 10, 15 years into my career, you know what I mean? Had some failures and going, okay, I what sort of legacy do I want to build? Do I want to have people say, oh, Virendra just makes it all about himself? Or it's like, it's awesome because he makes it about me.
Yep. Well, and I think thank you for sharing that. And I think it's really important to our basic philosophy here at Engineering Leadership, which is, this is why we believe, leaders are built, not born, right? Because we all have strengths and weaknesses. We're all, come to leadership with certain perspectives and experiences that have sort of driven us in a certain direction. And in many ways, it's getting through those moments of realizing, what got you here won't get you to where you want to go, right? So that's
a good one.
Still being comfortable and excited about what you've been able to do, but recognizing that anything you've been able to accomplish as an individual, pales in comparison with what you can hopefully help a team achieve. But that starts by setting yourself aside and putting the team first. And I think, one of the other things you wrote about was, getting to know your teammates on a personal level, and, making sure that, it's that old statement, no one really cares what you have to say until they know you care about them. And I think that boils down a lot of this too, where, making sure that particularly early in the career, when you're an individual contributor, sort of, that's how most of us started out. We had a particular job to do. We had tasks or projects to complete, and we achieved our recognition by doing those well, and either getting them done, early or on time or under budget, and it was very much, an individual effort. And I think, learning to be a good leader is recognizing that, hard work and discipline and effort are certainly crucial to everybody's success, but it's shifting that focus from what you can do to what can I help the team achieve, right? Which also,
Yes.
and that's why I think humility is so critical to that transition from, contributor to leader, or even in many cases, we have poor leaders who might be managers, but they'll never be leaders, right? Because they don't lift the rest of the team up and sort of take themselves out of the central role, right?
Yeah, no, totally agree with you. In fact, if you think about the word humility, it comes, in fact, humble and humility kind of are the same root word called humilis, which is Latin for low or close to the ground. And, you touched on it earlier, Doug, where it's not about thinking less of yourself, right? Because, I think sometimes people can confuse, especially in corporate America, which is, oh, this person's humble, which means they lack self-confidence. And I think it's not true. In fact, I think the most confident leaders, the most humble leaders are the most confident leaders, because then it's not about me figuring out what my accomplishments are. I'm totally comfortable in who I am, right? And the more I can shine the light on someone else, the better it's going to be, because they are going to be, they're going to be producing a lot more. They're going to be highly productive. And as an engineering leader, and as you grow, and you get into the executive teams and boardrooms, I mean, what's the leader is all about the team. It's not really about me. How can I inspire a shared vision? And you do that, by shining the light on somebody else. So I think as a leader, I have found, for me, I need to be sure about what I'm about, right? I have to be confident who I am, my self-worth. And then I have to ask myself, hey, what's my view of people? Are they there to serve me, or am I there to serve them in some ways? Yeah.
Yeah. And I like to say that, most, if not all, but most good things and successes that I've had personally have all started with an effort to help somebody or to help a situation. But that, and I didn't appreciate that until 20, 30 years into this journey. But when I looked back on the most rewarding successes I'd had, on the most outright sort of valuable successes I'd had, and I sort of said, well, what was the catalyst or the initial step along that journey? And most of the time it was looking for a way to help, and and things flowed from that versus
Absolutely.
trying to achieve something specific for me, right?
Totally. Absolutely agree with that.
So I was going to ask you something, and this does get maybe a little technical, but not necessarily. Do you think humility has played a role in your ability to get through multiple cycles of technology and still be, successful, both relevant and successful? I mean, when I look at your career going from something like, Unisys in your early days as an engineer, as, and we think about the state of software and technology at that point, right? Versus now completely cloud, all mobile, sort of, and I'm oversimplifying dramatically, but I think about a little bit about your professional journey from sort of mainframe to mobile, and you think about the waves of technology it took for that life cycle to unroll. And you've had success at each wave of that technological change. Is humility necessary to continual learning and relevancy?
I'm going to say absolutely. And I wish I'd learned this lesson earlier. mostly because when you're sitting where I'm sitting, not that I'm like way over the hill, but I'm definitely a lot further down in my career than
Right.
when I'm first starting. Because I think about legacy right now. What did I leave? Who are the people I worked with? I mean, okay, so I did this multi-million-dollar contract at Yahoo, with the CEO at that time, and took hundreds of, really thousands of engineers projects and stuff for that. But right now, it's about the people I worked with. How did I show up in many ways? And so I referred to it earlier. I think as I look back and I think about Unisys, and then as software development changed, and I'd say my time at Salesforce was pretty pivotal. I would say in some ways, I was working at a company called Jigsaw, and we got it was Salesforce's biggest acquisition at the time. Now, of course, they're buying $1 billion companies, but they bought my company at the time, and they were very successful at using Agile, right? And if you read their story, and I was with Parker Harris, who's the founder of Salesforce, and they struggled. Their software was extremely buggy, and they didn't develop software for a year, and they switched everything to Agile. And if you look at Agile's really, if you really look at the tenets of Agile, it's about, it's all about the team. And so I would say that has been really pivotal from a software development perspective, where they make it all about the team. In fact, we switched all our awards from individual awards to team awards, right? Which was the Scrum team that was the most successful? Which was the most successful? Then people are not necessarily thinking, hey, how am I going to be successful? It's how are we going to be successful? And I think it really comes down to that aspect of humility. Hey, how can I? It's not about, hey, am I going to be successful? No, how are we going to be successful, right? And so I'd say that I've seen that shift from a software, since you referred, from a software development perspective. And so then I took that over to all the companies, and a big Agile proponent. It's kind of one of my things that I usually do, and usually train everybody, train all my leaders. And it starts with me. It starts with the leadership. How do you view people, right? I think when it says everything begins and ends with leadership, I totally agree with you. And so I would say Agile was a big one. So it's probably now about a good 10 years, 10, 15 years since I've seen that wave in all the startups, all the companies here in the Valley. I think Agile's definitely helped people see that. Because even now when you go talk to people, people are looking for leaders that are able to, inspire vision. No one wants to see the leader be all about himself or herself or themselves.
Yeah, I agree. We have all kinds of leadership out there, and certainly there's plenty of toxic leadership too that occurs for a variety of reasons. But it does come back. I mean, I was reading an HBR article this week about basically ego being the enemy, and I often think about humility as the antidote to ego run amok, right? And it's not that having ego is bad. It's all about the balance, and like we talked about, not lowering yourself down or thinking less of yourself, but it's simply keeping that in balance. And I totally agree with the statement you made earlier that the most confident people are often the most vulnerable because they're the most comfortable with themselves. And you've written too about self-awareness and how everybody thinks they're self-aware until they get perhaps they might have a perception of self-awareness, but it might be radically different than the truth, and it might be quite different than their external awareness, right? In terms of how they show up.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. I talk about in one of my articles I wrote, self-awareness is internal versus external self-awareness. What do you think? How do you think you show up versus how do other people experience you? Absolutely.
Yeah. So a little bit of personal history. How'd you get from Pune to Clemson? Like
That is, again, I would say that's kind of quite I think back, because now I'm on the West Coast and I've been on the West Coast, since 1989, so it's a good 31 years. Right after I left Clemson, and I go, there aren't been many people who know Clemson. Of course, now that we're, in the limelight for the last 5 years or so. For sure, everyone over here knows Clemson. But it was a journey. I think I was just looking for, at that time, there was no internet at all. So I'm going, traveling by train, looking at books to find out what is the US like. And it's just amazing to see how far the internet's come, how far I come. I obviously thinking of it as an absolute blessing in some ways that I had no idea what my life would be like. And so I just was pursuing a master's in computer engineering at the time. And I had somebody who said, hey, man, these people are really good. And, it's a great program. I literally had no idea. Came there and I was completely blessed with the professors over there. We had Dr. Hammond, Dr. Spring, Dr. Poole, just some amazing people who invested in me. And I'm super, super, super thankful to Clemson. In fact, actually, I graduated in the centennial year, and just a little factoid, actually, my name actually is on the engraved over there on the pathway to Tillman Hall. So I always tell people, hey, I told my kids, hey, if you want to know really, did Dad really go to college? Yeah, he goes, here it is.
That's amazing. That's a journey. I mean, and I think back, I don't know when the last time you were back to Pune was, but I've spent time there in a couple different roles over the years. I built an engineering center in Bangalore.
Oh really?
Yeah, in the early 2000s, in the first internet, 1.0 wave.
Yeah.
We had about 150 engineers in Bangalore, and then we started a smaller satellite office in Pune. It's always been interesting to me how different the cities across India are and their specialty. Like there seems to be this concentration in Pune of a combination of computer science, electrical engineering, controls,
Yes.
Honeywell, the massive development center there. And I think some of it's probably spun out of that, but where Bangalore was much more about UI, UX, sort of, that part of the stack. Then we had, a different engineering center in Chennai that was much more about sort of the productivity and automation and service element of it. So it was
interesting.
It was
Interesting. I've when I was my time at Yahoo, I had a big team in Bangalore, and then I drove. Yahoo had this huge initiative of diversification across geographies, and so I ended up picking up a team or a third-party vendor. I don't like to call partner in Pune actually that did a lot of my software over there called Persistent Systems.
Yeah, it's really cool. As you, now that you're in more of a role around, as you said earlier, not in the early, we're not at the end of our careers, but we're not at the beginning anymore. What do you look for? If because you have talked too about, managing up and how to build better relationships with the boss, and what advice would you give to, younger folks watching us or listening to us today in terms of, the characteristics that you look for when you're hiring or promoting or developing? What stands out to you in early associates or early teammates that really gets you excited about them, or perhaps they should be thinking about working on themselves?
So I would say there's three characteristics, and not because I'm going to talk about humility, but I think, and I'm going to give the person the credit. So Patrick Lencioni has written a book called The Ideal Team Player. Okay. And he describes the ideal team player as one that is humble, hungry, and smart. And it's interesting actually. So he picked humble as number one, and I totally agree with him. And the way he describes humble actually is really interesting because, it says, Lencioni says, humble people don't have to have big egos or concerns about status. They're quick to point out the contributions of others and generally don't seek attention for their own. They define success collectively and not individually. People who are not humble are unable to be vulnerable or build trust and are incapable of engaging in honest conflict. And so humility, I think, is extremely important. Then I think of hungry, and now hungry is kind of an interesting one But I think there's another word for hungry that I've used in my thing, I have a leadership blog where I call it initiative, right? Hey, are you going to take initiative, right? Hungry people are people who are looking for more to do, more to learn, more responsibility. They rarely have to be pushed to work harder, right? They're self-motivated. They're always thinking about the next step. And then the last one is smarts. I think being smart is not about one's necessarily intellectual capacity. In fact, I think smart team players have good common sense about people, right? Now, you may think, oh, actually, you know what? I only want to have two of these. So let's say if you have a humble and hungry person, well, in all fairness, you love, Johnny over here that's necessarily really nice person, super humble, does a lot, but the lights aren't on. So you really want to have a smart person. If you want, let's say if you have a smart person who's super hungry, but they make it all about themselves and not humble, you want that person on your team, right? And if you have somebody who's humble and smart, but they just sit around waiting for life to happen to them, you don't want that person. So I think the three qualities really capture what I would say. I talk to younger, managers, young executives, and what have you. My kids are going, hey, humble, hungry, smart. Really, really, really excellent art virtues to have here.
Great. That's a great point. And we'll include that book too. I haven't read that one, but I look forward to reading it because I love that tagline, and we actually use it a lot where I work today. Of trying to
which one?
Hungry, humble, and humble, hungry.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard it many times, but I actually didn't know which book it came from. So now I know, and I'm going to go read it.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things I always like to ask is what was your leadership moment where you was there a conscious decision on your part that said, hey, I love engineering. I love the work that I'm able to do. I may be solving really interesting problems or challenges, but it's I want to lead teams. I want to develop people. I want to build success in others, and that's more important as an objective for me than any particular challenge I might take on personally. Was there because for me it was a very crystallizing moment. I remember it exactly. And, obviously it was a journey getting to that point, and then it's been a journey ever since trying to get better at it every day. But was there one of those points or moments in your career where you said, you know what, I'm going to put the time in, the effort in, and again, approach it with humility and try to really master this leadership thing?
Yeah. It's a good question. I haven't had a chance to think about it. I think there was a time, I would say, where I decided intentionally to, you can decide whether you want to go deep or wide in some ways, right? And I kind of did maybe a self-reflective, part of the 360s, going, what are you really good at? And so actually maybe it was 10 years ago or something like that, going, let me just embrace who I am. And so if there was something that I would say is hey, I love people. I love organizational development. I love leadership. I love learning. In fact, I'm in school. I'm back in school again right now, doing a program on evidence-based coaching leadership, right? Where I'm learning more about the theory about leadership and theory about people and what's the emotional intelligence and what's intersectionality. And is it really about people? In fact, it's funny because even at this time of my career, the first time people go, it's about, I learned a whole lot about, hey, I'm going to give people advice, but actually really speaking, and it ties really into humility, is, people have the answer within themselves. And my job is to help them discover their best self. It takes humility on my part to be able to say, I don't want Doug to say, oh, Virendra's a great leader. Virendra's a great leader if Virendra can activate the best Doug and allow Doug to be the best person himself. So right there, I would say it's probably about 10, 15 years ago, I realized that's what I want to devote my life towards. inspiring people to be the best version of themselves.
Well, I know we're running a little close on time here, but I'll ask you this, and that's because you mentioned this as well, and I think it's something I've sort of helped coach many over the years to try and differentiate, and that is, I would ask you, did you discover that it was that work that truly gave you joy? And for me, it was, and you've written a little bit about this, the difference between happiness and joy. And I think, for me, I've tried to, as helping others on this journey of self-awareness, which I think, is again, some of the best help you can possibly give someone. And you never have the answer for them, but it's a matter of helping them down that path. Right. But I try to ask folks, when, I find people spend a lot of time thinking about, or angsting about difficult situations, about what made them feel bad, about, and it's sort of there's been, psychology studies on this, that, as humans, we'll go to 10 times the effort to avoid risk and pain and sort of those aspects as we will towards chasing, upside. It's sort of like the lopsided, it's why we all, if we don't actually look at the statistics and we just use sort of gut instinct, we often make the wrong choice because we're overly risk averse. But, it seems like, along that journey of self-awareness, there's not enough time spent on analyzing why you had a moment of joy and what got you there. And you want to spend more time on that, not more time worried about what went wrong or, why you felt bad about something necessarily. Right.
Yeah. Now, in fact, there's another, you talked about joy, and I've written some stuff on joy too. I think there's studies from a brain science perspective. So I'm going to quote, I don't know if I'm going to quote him, but there's a person by the name of Dr. Jim Wilder. Okay. And he's done some amazing research on brain science. And he talks about this whole aspect of joy. Now, so don't quote me on this, but bottom line is, if we spend 5 minutes a day, 3 times a day, appreciating or recognizing what brought us joy, apparently it increases what is called the joy capacity in our brain. And the more we can do that, the more stressful situations we can handle. Now, what's an engineering executive talking about this? I believe because who wants to be around a non-joyful leader? Right. Like I want to be around a joyful leader. And now this is not about someone who just is a happy person, because remember we talked about earlier, I want to be self-aware. And so Doug, how are you doing? But if I'm joyful and I'm self-confident and I'm humble, I care more about what was happening inside Doug. But if I can't manage my own emotions, I don't know what's happening, I don't think I can lead you. As they say, you can only take someone where you have been, not where you haven't been, So I totally agree with you with joy.
Great. Well, I greatly appreciate it, Virendra, and can't thank you enough for spending time with us.